It's a little bit far.
Is that better? Do you think that's better? I still can't hear that. Is that better, is it? Right, okay. Right, well, we'll just make a start then. Welcome and thank you for coming. Okay. Thank you for coming along today to hear us. We're going to talk about eportfolios and reflecting on the use of eportfolios. Oh, that sounds better now. My name is Patricia McKellar. I'm from the UK Centre for Legal Education. We're a government-funded body, funded in the same way as educational institutions in the UK, and we're there to promote good teaching and learning practices within each sector, and I'm specifically designated in the law sector. So we're promoting good teaching and learning practices in UK law schools. Karen Barton is with the graduate Glasgow School of Law at the University of Strathclyde and works principally on the Diploma in Legal Practice, which is the postgraduate bridge course in the law degree in Scotland. We're going to be talking about eportfolios today, and basically the Lifelong Learning Initiative in the UK is gaining momentum. It's well established now, and it's progressing, and eportfolios are very much a logical part of that, because eportfolios allow the learner to reflect on their and to evidence their journey, their achievements. And they can see how far they have come, and they can also see their learning needs. It allows them to become self-aware of how they need to progress in their learning journey. Now, in the UK, there has been a policy. Let me move this on. A policy drive for personal development planning, and in particular for eportfolios. And these are some of the quotes here from government bodies seeking to promote eportfolios and personal development planning within the education sector in the UK. But it's not just a government drive, because of course this is a policy drive, but there is research out there.
Sorry. It's me.
Paul spoke in his keynote address about Lee Schulman, who writes prolifically on the professions. And indeed one of his proponents is the signature pedagogies, which is a mode of teaching which is inextricably linked with preparing people for particular professions. The signature pedagogies is looking at transforming knowledge in use, knowledge attained into knowledge in use. And it's pervasive in the teaching of a particular profession. And in our context, it's what it means to think like a lawyer. And we do that through reflection. So why do we need to reflect? Well, it's important for professionals to reflect because we learn from our experience. If we can go back and learn from what we've done, we can progress on in the future. And we can deal with situations which are familiar or unfamiliar or uncertain. It allows us to look positively at our mistakes. It allows us to develop a resilience to the mistakes and to learn from our failures. Reflective practitioners are able to draw on intuition. They know instinctively what is right, know instinctively how to deal with a particular situation. We're wanting to develop competent practitioners, and not just competent practitioners, but practitioners who can develop values, can develop attitudes, and can develop ethical approaches to their professional development. Now, we thought we would just cite eportfolios within the legal education landscape within Scotland, and because of that, just a little bit of history about how the legal education process works within England and Wales and also in Scotland. In England and Wales, we have an undergraduate law degree, and after that the students will branch off to decide whether or not they're going to become solicitors or barristers, and they have a period of in-house training, a period of training within the university, a legal practice course for 1 year or a bar course for 1 year, and they then go on to do some in-house training within a solicitor's firm or for a barrister. In Scotland, similarly it's undergraduate law degree, both branches of the profession will undertake the legal practice course of 1 year before they become either solicitors or advocates and will undergo their period of in-house training. What I should say is that in the UK, approximately 50% of students who undertake the law degree will not go on to become solicitors. They will go into other areas, perhaps related to law, but in other professions as well, so won't necessarily stay within the profession. Within England and Wales, there has been a radical shake-up of the process of legal education in the last couple of years with what's called the Training Framework Review. And there has been a consultation fairly recently of the training contract part, that's the in-house training part. Because, of course, we've had the traditional route of training within the legal firm, but also there is to be introduced another route where you have an appropriate legal experience, and within that, then you could also, that will also constitute sufficient qualification at the end of your academic career to become a solicitor or barrister. And the assessment mode for that, the proposed assessment mode for that, is by way of portfolio. Now, there is broad agreement on that proposal. Of a set of competencies to be assessed. But the key concern here is how is it going to be assessed? Because the practitioners see this as being overly bureaucratic, they see this as being something which is an imposition on them, something they're going to have to deal with, and they're not really sure if an e-portfolio is the best way of proceeding with it. However, the Solicitors Regulation Authority are still committed to this approach, and what they see is that them doing is providing the learning outcomes, but that the firms can decide how they wish to set up the framework or set up the structure for the actual process of attaining the outcomes. And they have a number of pilot projects which are just about to begin in legal firms to assess whether or not this is going to work or not. And these are some of the outcomes which have been set up by the Solicitor Regulation Authority, England and Wales, which they're seeking to have assessed. And these will lend themselves very well to assessment by way of portfolio, things like client handling, communication, workload management, self-awareness and development. These will lend themselves very well to e-portfolio.
I'll just briefly say a word or two about Scotland, where there is also, at this time, quite radical changes proposed to the way that lawyers are educated, not just at the training stage, which Patricia was speaking about in England and Wales, but right through from the law degree starting, right through to the end, or continuing professional development once people have qualified and are in practice. There has been a consultation which has taken place over the past 2 years, a very detailed, the biggest consultation ever in Scotland as far as the Law Society in Scotland, the governing body, the Regulation Authority for Solicitors in Scotland. And that consultation took place for about 18 months, and the consultation side of the process has finished, and they're now at the stage of producing proposals. But it covered existing providers of education, it covered students, it covered government, the public, anyone at all could actually enter into that consultation. Some of the stages we're at now, where the detail is now being presented to everybody prior to a final paper being proposed, is using words, again, that we've been using already this morning, about reflective learning, about integration of personal development plans. They're using the terms e-portfolio in the consultation documents. And they're really, again, focusing on this idea of assessment and needing to give professional profile, giving assessment a much more professional profile and understanding than currently was the case. The Education and Training Committee, who are responsible for facilitating the consultation, has come out with, in their final document, that portfolio-based learning will allow the students to chart this progress across a variety of skills. And in the new model that they're proposing, after what they're going to call the foundation level, which is the basic law degree level, professional education and training level 1, PEAT 1 as they call it, the e-portfolio, they're saying, will be a preferred method of assessment there. And in professional education and training stage 2, that's PEAT 2, what was called the old traineeship, will also be an essential mode of assessment in that work-based setting, experiential learning and reflection and so on. We see this being a way of joining up the educational process from law school undergraduate through to postgraduate education into work-based learning and work-based experience. Very UK-centric, so what's that got to do with an audience in the USA? Although perhaps not quite as overt as these statements that you've seen from the UK, Carnegie, best practices, recent reports on legal education in the US do also home in on this idea that students do need to be able to be more resilient, to reflect more, to practice being professional, and to do more experientially than they have been doing perhaps up until now. And a goal of professional schools, making students aware of what it's like to be competent in their own domain, and to give them this ability to reflect on that and their own motivation coming from within rather than coming from outside, and extrinsic motivation. They talk about them being metacognitive. The Carnegie report talks about students being metacognitive about their own learning, being responsible for their own learning. And they talk about pedagogies that can help to inculcate that in students. I think, Patricia, you're going to say a word or two about the project that we've been doing.
So there has been a drive, as I say, a policy drive towards e-portfolios, but also within the professions, within the legal profession also, the regulatory bodies are pushing forward and for e-portfolios, and that has been the catalyst to a certain extent to legal education looking at this more deeply. And the UK CALI, we set up a couple of years ago the e-portfolio project. And the e-portfolio project really looks at whether or not there is a place in legal education for an e-portfolio, and whether there are specific issues within legal education that we have to consider. And also whether or not is it just more work? Is it just a passing fad? Or is it something that we're doing anyway? And something if we do more thoroughly, if we spend more time on it, then is it something which is actually going to have benefits, not just for the learner, but also for the mentor, whether that be an employer, whether that be an educational person. So we want to look at these kind of issues. And the outputs of the project were to develop a model. Now, we actually wanted to create an e-portfolio which would take students through the education continuum from the undergraduate, their postgraduate, into their traineeship, and out into the profession thereafter. We wanted to create something they could take all the way with them, create this tail of learning all the way through their career. And something which was adaptable for those who are not only going to enter the profession, but actually perhaps are entering the wider professional sphere. In fact, that aim became too ambitious for us. We couldn't do that. And in fact, there are lots of e-portfolio tools out there, some of which we'll talk about later, which really take that role. But what we did do is we set up a project which had 3 case studies. And the 3 case studies are set in 3 universities in the UK, looking at best practice in e-portfolios and drawing out what we need for legal education. The first in the Glasgow Graduate School of Law, which already had a pilot project in e-portfolios, had a bespoke VLE for their students and was a postgraduate programme, and Karen will talk about that in much more detail later. The other 2 projects, which we won't deal with in any detail, one was at the Oxford Institute of Legal Practice. They had developed their own portfolio application using a mind mapping application, mind mapping piece of software, which they were piloting at Oxford, and they also used an open source VLE, and they were trying to see how that they could integrate those 2 together. They were using Moodle. It was also postgraduate qualification there too, so very vocationally based, as is the Glasgow model too. University of Westminster was a brand new project. This was an undergraduate programme and a proprietary system. They were using Blackboard. They used the Blackboard e-portfolio tool. And it was a work-based learning module that the students were working on, which again lent itself quite well to using an e-portfolio tool as they were reflecting on what they were doing, and it was useful for them for continual assessment throughout that programme. So portfolios therefore have a number of purposes then. They can be used as a summative assessment. They can be used against a set of criteria within education or for a professional body. It also is learning how to learn. It's reflecting and identifying your strengths and weaknesses and learning from that and building from that. It's that going through that process is a learning experience in itself. It can also be used as a presentation tool, showcasing your achievements, either within education or within a professional situation. And it can be used for planning and for career planning. It's a tool designed for self-reflection and action planning, so it can be used for future planning and future career development. This is quite a good pictorial view of an e-portfolio, and basically the top of that diagram there is everything that you put into the e-portfolio, and at the bottom there is what the e-portfolio can do for you. So you're putting in what you've done, any qualifications you might have, or stages you're at your career in your university career, what you can do, any skills or abilities that you have, what you're currently doing, and what you want to do, what you're looking out into the future. And within the ePortfolio, you have tools within the ePortfolio to allow you to collect and to store, to manipulate that data, those artefacts, to reflect on what you've done, to connect with others, or to share what you have there already, and to publish and put things out into the wider domain. So it's quite a good example there of what an ePortfolio can do for you. I think we'll move on now to Karen's example.
I'm going to talk in a bit of detail about then what our project did at Glasgow Graduate School of Law, and give you some background about how we set it into the current situation we had there. And then what we'll do after that is show you some examples, not in any detail, but just some screenshots of student portfolios produced, and then we'll talk about our evaluation that we've done of the work. As Patricia said, Glasgow Graduate School of Law is a postgraduate course. It's the bridge course between the undergraduate academic law and profession. So it's a one-year course which concentrates quite fully on developing legal skills and professionalism before students go out into traineeships in firms. We use a simulation environment, which you'll have heard Paul speaking about in the keynote speech, which is our bespoke, if you like, virtual learning environment for students. We don't use Blackboard or any of these kinds of things. They learn in a simulation environment alongside traditional mix of lectures and seminars. And they work in firms in 7 substantial projects for a whole year. We put the students into groups of 4, into firms of 4 on day 1, and they stay in those firms for the duration of the course, and a large part of their work is carried out within those firms on legal transactions. And to support that, they have a number of, already within GGSL, a number of facilities to help support that particular style of learning, and that includes face-to-face meetings with what we call practice management tutors. They have their own activity logs to record the amount of work they do on each project. They have their personal logs in which to reflect more deeply on that. They have intranet discussion forums on particular substantive topics that come out of the projects that they do. And then they have their own firm environment, which contains all their drafts, their correspondence files, style banks and so on, to help them work through the various legal transactions. So they already have a rich array of material there. And on top of that, we also obviously have other skills assessments, such as interviewing skills, advocacy, negotiation and so on, the sorts of things that they will have to practice and perform when they are in the traineeship. So in the ePortfolio project 2 years ago at GGSL, we actually had a paper project prior to starting work with Patricia, but 2 years ago we introduced an ePortfolio system, and we introduced that for a selection of our students. We have 272 students, but we didn't introduce this to all of the students. We only introduced it to students who were going to 5 local law firms. What we did try to do was engage the employers and say what we're doing here with our students is valuable, is beneficial, and it's useful for you to know what they're doing, so that when they come to you, you can carry that forward, and that the students will be able to show you what their levels of skills are, and you'll be able to talk to them in a much more meaningful way about how they need to develop further. So we wrote to a number of firms. 5 of them agreed to take part in the pilot. So the students who were taking part in our pilot at GGSL, prior to going to those firms, were all going to those firms, with the exception of a couple more, maybe 5 or 6 more each year, who are not going to those firms, like the idea of a portfolio and wanted to try it. So we have between about 20 and 30 students in each year, well, actually between 25 and 30 each year. And because we've been running for 2 years, we now clearly have students who've graduated from our course and who are working in their partner firms. And the idea was they would be able to take their portfolio forward into their firm. So this is the end of our 3rd year running portfolios, the end of our 2nd year running ePortfolios. We place the ePortfolio system within the environment that the students are used to working in their firms. So we have set up, it's really just a SharePoint page, but we set up the page in such a way that they've got a kind of area, a message board area, where they leave messages for one another in their firm. It's a private area that they all have access to, and only they and the practice manager see it. And this is their main focal point for what else they do in their projects. You'll see a tab at the top, which is case management. That's their link into the simulation environment and the various legal transactions that they'll take part in. But we also have self and peer assessment tools for them to facilitate their team working. And we also have the area I spoke about earlier, their activity and the personal logs, where they record what they've done and reflect on the work that they've been doing. And then we also located the link to pebblepad, or that's the name of our portfolio system, there, adjacent to all of that, so that while they're in that area and they want to record something or save something that they've been doing in their portfolio, it's very quick to just click on that link and it opens their portfolio system. Now, we looked at a number of portfolio systems before we alighted on this one. It's called pebblepad. It was developed by academics at the University of Wolverhampton in England. It's actually very reasonably priced, but you do have to pay for it. Now, our education faculty were piloting this for their teachers, and we managed to piggyback on their server and various things there. But you can actually access that portfolio from Wolverhampton at a rate per student. They will actually provide a service in terms of hosting the e-portfolios if you don't want to run one on your own server. We did look at open source, we look at bespoke, we had WebCT in our school, in our university. We looked at WebCT's portfolio system, but we didn't like any of them really. And this one is so simple and so easy, and we thought our law students would actually take to it quite well. We also showed the employers who we were working with these various types of e-portfolio, and this was the one they preferred as well. So we listened to them and what they thought might be more suitable. So that's why we chose this one. If anyone's interested, I can show you briefly how it works at the end, but I won't want to do a demo of it. Other than to show you in more schematic terms what an e-portfolio is in terms of how the softwares are organised. Users, these people here, basically create, edit and review various, what they call in pebblepad terminology, assets. And there are two kinds of assets. There are reflective assets, which are the pieces of new information that students are bringing, so the reflective work that they carry out. And what pebblepad provide are a number of pro forma that allow the student to fill out the reflections rather than blank sheets of paper. But it runs from blogs, which are fairly blank, to something more structured like action plans, so a series of questions that the students can fill in order to help them reflect perhaps a bit more formally. So they're reflective assets, and students can create, edit and review those on an ongoing basis. And there are also evidential assets, which are ordinary files, and they can be scanned images, pictures, files, videos, whatever. Transcripts as well, that students have obtained from other educational institutions. And actually you can pull in students' assessment results from the management information systems within your institution as well. So with a combination of reflective and evidential assets, you basically, the student can basically pop all them into what's called the asset store. So they just collect and collect and collect various assets as the year goes on, reflective and evidence. And they can link to two things. So they can reflect and link to the piece of evidence that shows what they're talking, or evidences what they're talking about. The student also has complete control about who sees these assets. They can have them completely private and no one ever gets access, or they can choose to share them or even publish them to the web or export them into another e-portfolio system. And when they choose to share these assets, they can also give the users they share them with various levels of rights. So they can be allowed to view the asset only, or they can be allowed to comment on it or copy that asset or collaborate. So there are various levels of sharing, various levels of rights to each individual person they share with. And you can set these up as group values as well. And the end result really at the end of the day, although we spoke about it being both a process and a product, this is really all about the process. It's about the storing, the reflecting, the building, the experience, going back over, reviewing. At the end of the day, what we want them to produce is a web folio, which is like a snapshot of where they are in their legal education. And they do that by taking all these other assets, reflective and evidential, and bringing them together and making a web folio. And it's really just a series of web pages. And they need to know nothing about HTML or any other form of web editor. They just form those pages, and I'll show you some later. What we also need to provide the students with, as well as the software, is actually quite a detailed structure about what we want them to do. having done this now for 3 years, we found that just saying to the students, collect evidence and reflect on it, doesn't actually work. They don't know what to do. They're totally lost. What kind of evidence? How do I reflect? So we've now actually come down to quite a detailed set of instructions, and this is the minimal thing we ask them to do. But once they get going on that, they actually start to see how, oh, I can do this now and I can do that. So we give them a minimal set and then let them add to that as they go along. And we start our portfolio project in November and it ends in April, and it's interspersed with a number of things they have to have in that portfolio minimally. And as I say, they add other things in. But we start them off with a meeting, show them pebblepad. It takes them half an hour to learn how to use that. But we focus on what's reflection, where am I, what am I doing here, what do I want to be? And that's what we focus on for really that hour and a half. And I give them 2 little assessments, which I'll show you in a minute, or ask them to complete these assessments, go away and do them. And that's the start of their portfolio. It gives them something to hook on to. By the end of November, I want them to have completed a first personal statement, and I ask them to share that with me at that point. And I have a look at that and give them some feedback, and I can put comments on very easily. When they share something, they just say, I want to share it with Karen. It automatically sends an email to me. It tells me, here's the link. I log on, and if they've allowed me to comment, which I do ask them to do, I can add comments to that, and then they just see the comments I've added into their web folio. And all I see is what they've shared with me. I don't see any of the other assets that they might have. Then we have a one-to-one meeting, discuss how they're doing. Then we do some other things. I ask them to do a critical incident report on one of the transactions that they're running with. I ask them to also do some pre-interview assessment reflection, take part in some interview training, and then also some post-reflection. And once they've done that they can transfer that to all sorts of other areas. So they do that for their advocacy skills, their negotiation skills, other subjects, other transactions that they're doing. By the end of April, by the end of March, I want them to finalise a portfolio of some sort, send it to me, and then we have a final meeting. This first section I spoke to you about, I actually concentrate on getting them to think about what it is a portfolio is going to do for them. So we split it into 2 things. One of it focuses quite distinctly on skills, and pebblepad gives you an ability to create your own little skills profile questionnaires. They're dead easy, and you can just edit them and add in what you want. So I do some little profiler things and ask them to self-assess currently how confident they are in each of the areas, the skills areas, negotiation, interviewing, advocacy, legal writing, legal drafting, team working, and all these other usual sorts of skills areas that we're wanting them to develop. We ask them to do that at the start of the course and ask them how are they going to develop further. Also importantly, what we ask them to do is think about why they're here, why they're on the course, why they want to be a lawyer, and what they think being a good lawyer to them means. It's not just about developing their skills, it's about developing their attitudes and their professionalism. So I give them a list of about 30 statements: producing work of high quality, sorting problems for clients, taking accounts of clients with different needs, updating and responding to new demands, being an active member of the profession, a whole series of comments. And they can agree with them all if they like. They can say, yeah, I think that's an element of being a good lawyer. But the key is they have to choose the 5 top ones that, taken together, represent their view of what they're trying to achieve, and then think about how they're going to manage to achieve those. How are they going to get there? How is that going to relate to my skills development? And how do I know I've got there at the end of the day? This is a really important exercise for them, because without it, they don't really get what an e-portfolio is. And this is the key, I think, to actually making the whole thing work. As I said, we also, once they're underway, they are asked to do a number of other activities. One of them is to do a critical analysis. And again, within the portfolio tool, you can create forums that give them some structure to how to conduct a critical incident analysis. And this is just one, again, that I created within the system. Describe the incident. Why are you choosing it as a critical incident? Then describe it, give a detailed description, and then it goes on to reflect on it, what you're taking from it, what you're learning from it. So the questions get deeper and more reflective as they work through this. At the end of it all, students come up with something like this. There's a series of templates. They just pick one, backgrounds and colours, and they create a series of web pages effectively. And we leave it up to them to decide how they want to structure that portfolio. This particular student has decided to structure it by skills. So they've looked at where they an introduction just saying who they are, but then they've decided to focus down on the skills they've developed through the diploma. You'll see that some of the text is a different colour, it's just a hyperlink, and you'll see that they're linking qualities of a good lawyer. That's them actually linking to that attributes questionnaire that I spoke about at the beginning. So they're saying, oops, daisy. They're saying at the start, I reflected on what I thought a good lawyer was, and they're linking to that initial reflection they did. The same with this, they undertook an audit of their skills. So they're supposed to go back and look at what they said at the beginning, how they've changed as a result of coming through the diploma experience. This is another student who has arranged their folio by subject area. And they've also added in interviewing skills at the bottom for some reason. I think it must have meant something to them particularly. But they've decided to arrange it by subject. Here's one on civil procedure. They're using evidence. This link here is linked to an actual piece of evidence. The record is the final set of documentation that goes to the court once they've finished their civil court procedure project. So that's a record of all the drafting that they did in that particular course. And this is actually a link to the video of their advocacy for civil procedure. So they can not only link to reflective evidence, but they can link to actual evidence of what they've done. And there's another one where they've got a link to a video of their negotiation at the end of the PI project, and also a bigger reflective piece of work on their practice management report, which they think gives a better idea of how they developed as a team member through working on the diploma. So it's up to students what they put in, and there's so much rich evidence they've got already just having worked through the diploma. They've got tons of things to choose from. That was our project, but we also did at the end of that obviously some feedback and some evaluation. And we're going to present the feedback, which is actually taken not just from DGSL, but from some of the other partners who were also carrying out their ePortfolio projects as we were doing ours. What we tended to do was have focus groups and divide the students into small groups and get them to discuss some questions, and they would put the answers on flip charts, and then we'd have some open discussion on it. And we'll just look at some of the questions we asked them, not all of the questions that we ask in the focus group. Just let you get an idea of what the students think about this particular process.
Yeah, and I think some of the comments there are fairly self-explanatory. So what did you enjoy about doing the ePortfolio? Well, generally they found it a beneficial process. They liked being able to express how they felt about their work. It wasn't something which they did normally. They didn't normally do this, but they liked that opportunity. They liked being able to amalgamate the work into one place and to draw different parts of it together and keep it in one aspect. They liked being able to reflect. That was their key benefit from their point of view, was to reflect on the performance and be able to build on that reflection to take it with them into the future.
Of course, we always ask them what you don't like, and it can be time consuming for some of them. Some of them find it, it's just filling in more forms, too much to do, and if we ask the question, we're going to get the answers. Some of them did raise issues about security, whether or not it's practical in a legal firm to have something like this, and what happens with confidentiality, security. Some of them did struggle, although a lot of them said they enjoyed reflection. Some do struggle with reflection. It's not anything we've asked our law students to do up until now. It's never been about themselves and having to think more deeply about what they're doing. And of course, this idea of not being sure what you're doing and someone else hasn't told me if this is right, I'm not really sure. It's kind of taking the baby steps on their own for the first time almost without having been told, yeah, there's a tick in the box for doing that.
We asked them what would have made the process easier for them, and they wanted more examples, they wanted more structure. Certainly at the beginning, when we weren't too sure of this, we hadn't given them much structure, as Karen said, so they did want more of that there. They also wanted the ability to have a kind of flexible structure, so that there was a structure there, but also they could customise that if they wanted to. That last student is a fairly recent quote there. What would have made the process easier? Nothing. Everything was well explained in illustrated example portfolios. So obviously we are learning as well how to deal with the portfolios in the students.
Advice to other students. That's always quite a good one to actually know what students learn about the whole thing. I think that the main message from them all was it's something you should do as a fairly regular process. Don't leave everything for the last minute. A portfolio doesn't work in the cramming method that I think, again, that they've been used to doing. It's let's leave this and cram. It just doesn't work like that. They have to stop doing that and change direction and start thinking about being more religious about how they actually record work and how they reflect on it, and something they have to do all the time. Also, I think that a lot of them at the beginning just keep loading things in and uploading, and just in case I'll get everything in here, and it's all about volume rather than quality. And I think again at the end they see that it's not essential to have tons of stuff. If it doesn't fit, if it doesn't work, then don't use it.
We wanted the students to think of what they would take out into their career with them, because they're looking at this as a lifelong learning pattern for them. And again, this ability to reflect and ability to learn, they wanted to take that with them, to analyse work and tasks, and giving that structure so that they could measure their own development. They felt that they could accept criticism better. They were having to look at their own limitations in the work that they were doing. They would have to think about that before they handed work in. So therefore, when they got the criticism, they felt they were able to cope with it better, and that would assist them when they went out into the workplace. They also had a better idea how to give feedback. In other words, they were going to become good mentors themselves, hopefully, at a later stage in their lives. And interestingly enough, they recognise that professional training is always a work in progress. It's not something which stops in the academy. It goes on from there. And you can learn lessons from past experience. And the last quote there, I now know what I would like to do in my traineeship. They're much more focused at the end of this process in knowing what they want to do when they get out there and how they want to use their previous experience.
For us, there's certainly lots of lessons we've learned from doing this. It's been really, really useful for us to have gone through what we thought was quite obvious was never obvious to the students. We need to be clear, we need to make it simple, we've really got to go right back to basics. We know that for some students, collection of evidence can be problematic. We actually had more problems doing this in a paper-based version than on the ePortfolio version. And it can be slightly problematic at times if they're not sure what to put in, but it's something that I think we've worked on quite a bit. They need lots of guidance. They need detailed work plans, they need tools to help them reflect, which start with just describe things and get into deeper reflection. They need forums and things to fill in rather than blank sheets of paper. We definitely do need to review things with them, and we definitely do need to give them feedback. Although when I ask the students to try and be resilient and self-evaluate at the end of this, they do need the feedback from experts and external people as well. And we need to start with this fairly slow process at the beginning and they will actually pick up on it. What we have found is it will be definitely more difficult to engage with the profession on this. It's a concept that the profession hasn't quite caught on to yet, I don't think. They do have reviews and logbooks and things that they ask the students to do, but it's not very reflective. I mean, and the employers that we work with say this to us. They've taken some of the tools that we've used here and they've taken them into their organisations and certainly found it beneficial. And they like the fact that now, and with the students they have coming from us, it's much more trainee-centred in terms of the reviews. The trainees are coming with, this is what I've done, I need to do a bit more. So they find that, and this is what they wanted out of the whole process, that the trainees are much more proactive, much more focused on where they want to go. We have a number of, if anyone's interested, because this is a project that's working through the UK Centre for Legal Education, the UK Centre has its own website, and it has we have a number of resources there. One on the whole project itself, and one which is, I'll see if it'll let me link quickly, one which is actually more of a how-to and probably tip sheet, I think, on using ePortfolios. So one of them is more about the project, one of them is a bit more practical if anyone's interested. It's taken an age to go through.
I think the second one's more a kind of guide for ePortfolios, a kind of start-up guide for ePortfolios. And the first link there is to the project page itself, which has the evaluation data and has project reports and how the project was set up.
Here it comes. It's taken a while to go through. Your website is always dead slow.
See no slower over here, obviously.
Oh, wireless network. There we go.
There you go.
Okay, so there's that's what the site looks like when you get in, and there's some various bits and pieces there if you're interested. Okay, and I think that's all we have to say, and if anyone has any questions, we'll try to answer them for you if we can.
Okay. How do you award credits to the students?
Well, in this particular project, we didn't assess the portfolio part at all itself, because it was, for us, it was a group of only about 30 students who were doing this over and above the normal course, and so 240 other students weren't being asked to do this particular thing. So we didn't assess them formally. We just gave them feedback and on the structure of their portfolio and the content. However, within the portfolio itself are a number of assessed tasks. So their interviewing assessment is assessed, and we asked them to put that in just and reflect on what they got as a mark for their interviewing. So each part of their portfolio, most of it in fact, has pieces of already assessed work in it. And that can be different types. It can be formative assessment and summative assessment that they put in. Yeah. I think one of the partner institutions uses this in a module where it is assessed, though.
Yes, in the University of Westminster they use it as an assessed module. It's a work-based learning module, so they have to go through various stages within the module, and preparing reports, sending back information and evidence that they have gathered throughout the course of the module, and then that is gathered together at the end in the portfolio and submitted to the assessors to be assessed. And also, of course, the profession are looking at it as an assessment tool there. So all the evidence which will be gathered through the course of your traineeship will be then submitted to an accrediting body, who will then have to assess the evidence, the artefacts which you've submitted, so that you can use it in that way as an assessment tool.
At your school, you're using it for the students to self-assess?
Yes, partly.
Okay. And the students get to decide, do employers ever see this?
Yes, in our school, because we've got our 5 firms, at the end of the project, I ask the students to share their webfolio with their employers, which they've just done. And then we'll have the employers in and speak to them about what they've seen from the students' folios.
But the student gets to decide what goes into
yes.
it for the employer to see?
That's right.
Okay, so where they say, I'm really bad at negotiation, that could be something private?
It can be. What we again, that's an issue that you have to get across, and one of the issues that students raise is, you might be nervous about revealing weaknesses that you have. What we try to say to them is, you're always learning, and what you thought was good at one point in your life, 5 years from now you'll think wasn't that good after all. And even if you don't think you're very good, others may think you're good. And this is why it's important for third party feedback to come in, because students can, and quite often the really good students are very, very critical on themselves. And I've seen them reflecting on their interviewing assessment, thinking, oh, I was terrible, I did this. And then they get the feedback from their assessment, and it actually it gives them some, it helps bring them to a median which is actually a bit more realistic. So it stops them being self-critical as much as they were. And also those who think they're fantastic, again, are also perhaps checked back to think, no, you're not that good after all. So we do emphasise that it's important that evidence has to be self-generated evidence, reflective evidence, but also bring in evidence from other people's view on you. It's this kind of 360, as they use in HR circles, 360-degree feedback. And for the employers, because they do reviews with the students or the trainees once they get to them, they would have comments on that. So they would look at what the student has said and say, no, I think you weren't accurate on what you said about yourself is not quite true. And that's what I will also add in my feedback. I might say, I think you've been too harsh, or you've still actually maybe got some learning to do in that particular area. It's something that develops. It is something to develop. They're not as good at it at the start, but they do get better.
You can see how, though, in an employment situation it's quite difficult, because these trainees are all competing against one another to stay in the firm. So from their point of view, do they want to put forward something which is perhaps not 100%, which they're not too sure about? So you can see how that becomes more complicated in that situation.
Yeah,
as opposed to academy.
I don't know if it's just the employers we worked with. We did speak to the employers about all of this and what an e-portfolio was, and these issues about revealing weaknesses. The employers don't mind that. They actually say it, we don't mind that. We want you to be honest. We want you to know when you've made a mistake or when you don't do something very well, because we'd rather you didn't go around covering up. That's the worst thing for us as employers, is that you have got some idea that you're really great and you're not, or that you try and cover mistakes by not admitting to them or not learning from them. And actually, that's what, as I say, one of the big benefits, and they say it being much more trainee-led. They're not frightened to come and say, well, I didn't feel I learned very much by working in this particular seat for 6 months, or I would like more help to do this particular thing because I realise I don't know it as well as I should do.
I'd appreciate if you would talk more about either the current use or perhaps the planned future use of this for mid-career professionals, particularly with regard to external accrediting bodies. Here in various states in the U.S., we have continuing legal education, which ranges from very useful to an entire waste of time and a bit of an industry.
Yeah.
So I see potential here, but I also see a lot of obstacles.
Yeah, for mid-career, I don't even think we've looked at that yet.
I mean, they're very much kind of early career.
Perhaps because you're part of Education and Training Committee at the law in Scotland, where you know, it's certainly eportfolio is something being talked about at the stages we are talking about at. First, the bridge course and the traineeship stage. But I know that CPD was one of the issues that Education and Training were looking at as well. And I think they've pulled back from a full eportfolio into something more bare.
Just kind of comment on that. There's a number of initiatives in Scotland trying to deal with those issues. And in particular, centering around the idea of specialty accreditation, because while there's a need for a lifelong, assessment system, the varieties of legal practice, certainly Scotland, mean that it's really difficult to have one kind of assessment system for all lawyers. So basically, one of the ideas is to have effectively a kind of simulation environment of one sort or another, where you would put through lawyers through particular transactions, and you would, at the end of that, if they were successful, you would then accredit them as lawyers in accredited in that particular specialty, and that would then be repeated maybe 5 years down the line or something like that to ensure competency in practice. But one of the ways in which you would bridge between the various assessments, as it were, or maybe even make one of the next assessment exempt, the practitioner for the next assessment would be to have some kind of eportfolio system where they would be carrying their work. There's really strong issues there about privacy, for example, client confidentiality and so on. I still think it's possible to strip out a lot of the private details, as it were, and present particular files. But in any kind of eportfolio system that's embedded in practice, it's even more important to kind of put into effect what Patricia and Karen talk about in terms of triangulation. So in other words, it's okay for, say, the Law Society and the practitioner to be there, but there needs to be some kind of a body there which is kind of ensuring that there is fair play, good practice in eportfolio development standards and so on. The universities are a place to play there, but also other bodies as well. There's a body in Edinburgh, for example, called the WS Society of Registrars. Quite an ancient body, but they're moving into legal education much more. They've developed a specialty accreditation program, and they're kind of they're the third leg, as it were, of the triangle. They see themselves in that kind of position. I think it's a really important development, not only for continuing professional development in Scotland, but as a model for us.
Okay. Well,
all right. I think there's any more questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much
for coming in.